Great. You gonna hear me well from there?
Yeah, I will try my best.
All right. We need a little bit of adjustments, but we're good. Okay, great. Well, we're ready?
I'm trying.
No, don't worry. It's going to be uncomfortable for everyone. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.
Good morning. Welcome. So you know, I think by now, how much I like to pray for healing. And one day I was visiting a small group, and one guy had a severe injury on his shoulder that required surgery the following day. So this man was a Christian, and when I offered to pray for healing, he refused. Not because he was about to receive surgery very soon, but because he was convinced that God was behind the reason for his injury. So he literally said that God allowed it to happen, therefore there wasn't any reason to pray. I finally convinced him. I said, I want to pray for you. So I convinced him. He let me pray. But he was still affirming that it was God's will if he had this injury and that he will not be healed by my prayers. I don't know if you imagine like trying to pray for someone, have faith for healing when someone says no. And you know what? He was not healed. At least I have a great explanation for this one. You know, it's harder sometimes to pray for healing and you don't know. But on this one, he wasn't healed. So he told me that God probably had a plan for him to testify at the hospital or something, and that's why this was happening to him. So like a lot of Christians, he tried to reason in place of God. So I asked him to let me know if anything glorious happens at the hospital. Like, please let me know. And since he didn't reach out to me after a week, I found his phone number. I'm resilient. I texted him. He never answered. So I'm afraid that his narrative was not necessarily right. So a few weeks ago, I started a message by asking this question. I don't know if you remember. I said, does God allow evil? Many Christians would answer yes to that question. Many, most Christians even. First, because we're often conditioned to believe from a young age that he allows evil. From the first step as being a Christian, we believe that he allows evil. Second, because it explains everything. God would allow evil because he has a plan in eternity that requires evil to happen in order to redeem us. It's a good explanation. It's a good way to see it. It explains everything. Then I can just go and just trust God. There's probably a reason for why I'm going through this. Or we also believe such a thing because our reading of the Bible. That's how we read the Bible. Like many stories of the Bible, it seems that God lets Satan play with us, so a greater purpose can be accomplished, right? God toughens the heart of Pharaoh. He incites David to sin against him. He sends an evil spirit to Saul to push him to keep on sinning, etc. He allows a thorn in the flesh of the Apostle Paul. He lets Satan sift Peter as wheat, and lets Satan enter into Judas. And finally, and that's my favorite one, the best one, he allows Satan to do anything he wants with Job. Right? I'm sorry, but yes, if we read our Bible and we look at this, our narrative will be God allows evil. Makes sense, right? That's what I believed for a while. That's what maybe many of you believe when you come here. And I want to debunk one of the biggest myths of Christianity. Are you ready for this? One that has been present since the institution of the Catholic Church. Not even talking about the Reformation, like 500 years ago. No, like over 1500 years ago. After Constantine declared the church as the official religion of the Roman Empire. So one that was created to become convenient to the Christian kings of the Middle Age. I mean, think about it, If God allows evil, then they can themselves cause evil, which is kill, steal, and destroy. As long as it is done in the name of God. Today, we no longer cause harm in the same way in the name of God. I think we're better, okay? But we've kept this theology that because we don't understand why there is evil, it must be because God allows it. But what if I told you that all of the examples that seem to prove that God allows evil that I just quote can be completely interpreted through the lens of three big components. I call them like the three causes of suffering. And we're about to unveil them in a few minutes. But first, we're going to start with the most popular narrative behind the idea that God allows evil. And it's found in the book of Job. We just talked about it at the last one. Especially a confrontation between Satan and God. So after we learn who Job is and what a great man he is, like I put like in the first, like Job 1, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. Job has all of the blessings any man can dream of. And we completely change the scenery and end up in heaven. That's the next part of the first chapter of Job. So we're going to read through Job 1, verse 6 through 12. Do you have a Bible there? Job 1, verse 6 through 12. I'll give you a couple seconds. And by the same time, you can open your Bibles, your apps. We have some Bibles too. Who wants a Bible? Just raise your hand. Anyone else a Bible? Thank you, Rick. All right. So Job, chapter 1, verse 6 through 12. Verses 6. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He's blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Verse 9. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread through the land. Verse 11. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your power. But on the man himself do not lay a finger. which actually means literally do not kill him. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So very quickly, I mean, it's a big book. If you read Job, it's actually a very long book, and we'll have like a video that's going to help us a little more understand Job. But he's going to lose everything. He's going to even lose his health. He's going to have friends that are going to come and going to tell him he must have done something wrong. He's going to say no. He's going to keep praising God for it, and at some point he's going to start saying, okay, I guess there's something wrong. I guess there's something wrong with God, because nothing is wrong with me. And we'll see a little more about that. But that's like the story of Job, right? Until now you understand, like nothing has changed. So I'm gonna tell you something very important. There is this translation that we're reading here is incorrect, like a lot of translations. And it's incorrect because it actually bought a narrative that we were talking about Satan here. Have you ever heard that it could not be Satan here? Ever? All right. Let me bring you to that. The enemy of our souls. I'm talking about God's nemesis, Satan, the devil, the one that will be destroyed at the end of times. But the reality is that it is a full interpretation from translators throughout the ages. It's an interpretation that has been followed by most scholars for hundreds of years until the past 50 years or so. When some linguists pointed some obvious misinterpretation there, and today more and more theologians accept a new interpretation. Here's what hurts the narrative right here. The passage in Hebrew doesn't mention Satan's with a capital S. No capital S. It actually has an article in front of it. The Satan. This is exactly what the Hebrew says, alright? I'm not inventing it or anything. It says the Satan. Some people, maybe some of you who have brought their own Bible, they actually have a good translation to it, the accuser. So we're not talking necessarily about Satan the devil with a big S, but we're talking about someone named the accuser. Someone that has the role of the accuser. Can be also translated, Satan, as adversary. It's a word. It has a meaning. Satan is an adversary. We see in the Bible very often that king or some bad people are adversaries. They are Satans to the kingdom of Israel. We see that dozens of times in the Old Testament. So if we put an article in front of it, it's not referring to the devil specifically. It could be, all right? But to the meaning of the word, the accuser. Satan is used officially for the first time to designate the devil in the Gospels. That for sure we know, and it's the first time we use Satan as a proper name, as a real name, like to designate the devil, Satan, in the Gospel. And when mentioned in the Old Testament, the devil is referred to as the serpent or the devil. Can you follow me still here? The role of the devil is actually very blurry in the Old Testament. It's actually very hard. Once the devil is done with in Genesis 3, we don't really hear officially about him until maybe Job, if that's actually him. And then what we hear about is evil gods that run nations. And so we understand through the lens of the gospel that those evil gods are run by the devil. Okay? But the reality is that the devil is really a principality, a character that starts to playing a big role in the New Testament. And of course, we see descriptions of the devil in the New Testament, but also in Revelations. It's indeed that same book that reveals a lot about who Satan is and helps having a new reading of the Old Testament through the lens of how much the serpent is involved. So that same serpent, same snake, the name is Serpent, was involved in many horrible things that happened throughout the journey of the people of Israel. We're not saying it's not happening. We're not saying it's not behind it. But we often refer to evil gods that are under the authority of the devil. So the interpretation that this is not the devil we are referring to here in the book of Job, but the accuser, needs now to be explained. And it all starts with the understanding of a very important concept in the Bible, which is, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, the divine counsel. Anyone has ever heard of the divine counsel here? So those things are going to be very important for us to really understand how God functions. God is seated on his throne in heaven, and he's surrounded by angels and, or, we're gonna put an and or here, divine beings, often referred to as sons of God. Everyone ever read sons of God in the Bible? Okay, so now you're starting to understand. There's a very weird passage in Genesis chapter 6 that talks about sons of God. So some people interpreted humans, but that doesn't absolutely make sense. Sons of God, or really angels, angel beings, divine beings, that just disobeyed God, came to earth and started having relationships with women, and they had children with them. And it gave birth to the Nephilims. Go read Genesis 6. This is biblical, right? I'm talking about the Nephilims. It gave birth to actually the giants, the breeds of giants that actually Israel had to fight even later, because there were still some left over after the flood. Again, I didn't invent it. There were some leftovers after the flood. I don't know exactly how it happened, but this idea that angels or divine beings fell and started to do bad things on earth and disobeyed God, those divine beings were part actually of a council. God is surrounded by divine beings that he created, that he loves, that love him back, and some disobeyed. Okay, I'm not going to even go as far as like what are demons and things like that, but this is important to understand the source and the roots of evil in order to explain why God allows or not evil. You get me here? So in Job 1:6, it actually talks about the sons of God. It doesn't say angels in Hebrew, it says sons of God, but it's translated into angels. And from now on I will call them divine beings, to differentiate them from the angels, because angels are supposed to be messengers. So very often when we talk about an angel, especially on earth, we talk about a messenger, someone that comes and gives a message from God. But when we are in heaven, it's very different. There are different statues, there are different roles, okay? So the ones that we know and we heard of, there are cherubims, there are seraphims, there are angels and archangels. I mean, that's, at least you've heard those four. If you really go through the Bible if you're very picky, sometimes you're going to actually see that there are other categories of angels, all right? Or divine beings. And they all have, as I said, different function and purpose. The seraphims, they were known to be the ones the closest to the throne of God. And what's interesting is they were the one that were given the mission, and that's kind of interesting to see. They were given the mission to advise God on his decisions. That sounds completely weird to think that God would need advice, all right? And I don't think he needs them. Same thing as he doesn't need our opinion, but he wants to hear us, okay? The same way he created this idea where he has a council and he interacts with them and he wants them to tell him what they think. He's actually questioning them the same way as he's doing with his creation, the flesh that he created in us in. I got this one. So he chose to give responsibilities to the divine beings he created. Are you still following me? Did I lose you? No? We're good? Okay. So we have this divine council. Many roles. Cherubims, seraphims, many roles, okay? So each being was given a task. And we're very quickly, through the Bible, we identify several spirits, several beings that come from this council. They're not coming from the devil, they're coming from this council. They're coming directly from the hand of God. We talked about it a few weeks ago. We talked about that angel of destruction or angel of death that God sent in order to punish, to judge David. Like he was holding his sword against Jerusalem like that, and that's exactly where he was standing that the temple was built. This is an angel that comes to do something harmful to Israel, but he's not evil. He comes from the hand of God. So very quickly, we see those spirits coming from the council in the Bible. We have the mention of a lying spirit in 2 Kings 22. Write it down. Read it at home. 2 Kings 22. It's this prophet, I think it was Micah, who is he's actually sharing with Ahab, and he's saying, I've seen I was taken in front of the divine council, and I saw them talking, and one say, I will go put a lying spirit in the mouth of the prophets. So we're not talking about an evil council. We're talking about God's council. In order to accomplish the purposes of God, God decides to send a lying spirit. So the prophets are lying, and Micah is the only one that is telling the truth. It's a little challenging, but it's a reality. This council does things that are completely and fully the will of God. 2 Kings 22, write it down. Then there's an angel of death I talked about or an angel of destruction in 2 Samuel 24. We talked about 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago. A fierce spirit sent to torment Saul in 1 Samuel 16. Again, I'm not going to go into details, but a lot of translation says evil spirit, but the real translation is fierce, like a lion. It's not necessarily evil, but a lot of people say, well, if it's fierce, it has to be evil. Can God send an evil spirit? I believe not. That's my point today. So he's sending a fierce spirit. So Saul is still go in his way. He's still doing the bad things that he does. So everything that those spirits or those beings that are sent, everything that they have in common is that they're sent by God directly. They are doing things under the authority of God. Still following me? Another thing that they have in common, they bring judgment. People are doing bad things, therefore because they're doing bad things, God comes and brings judgment and pushes them in that same direction. A few weeks ago I said sometimes God submits us to the devil because we have made the choice to follow the devil. That's what happened with Judas. Judas was already rotten, he was already bad when Satan entered him. Then there is one mention, and like I'm going to go into deeper details here. There's one mention of one of them in Genesis. One of them in Genesis that is not sent by God. So there's one divine being in Genesis that is not sent by God. Who it is? Any ideas? The serpent. Thank you. So basic common knowledge is that we have an interpretation of Isaiah that actually talks about, I think it's Isaiah, talks about an evil king. A lot of people say, well, that might probably be Satan there, and that would explain that Satan took a third of the angels and fell on the earth, and he was evil on the earth, which is true. The Bible really said that Satan took a third of the angels, but the reality is that we see the fall of Satan way before the fall of Adam and Eve. And if you read through Genesis, and if you have that narrative again of, okay, what if the Nakash, the serpent, Nakash in Hebrew, what if the serpent was a divine being and had not fallen yet? Would that make sense? And now we're going to see that it makes sense. This Nakash, that's the name of serpent in Hebrew, the serpent was one of the most crafty, or, and again translation, or cunning, or subtle, or shrewdest, or Sneaky. You go through all translations. Some will say subtle. So that's pretty good, you know, like you're a subtle animal. And some say sneaky. There's even one saying clever. So the term in Hebrew has like, and that happens often, has both a negative and a positive sense. And so it's very hard to translate because it depends on the context. I choose the narrative that it actually more on the positive side. He was an advisor. He was someone that really was smart, clever, and may give advice. Are you ready for another bomb? Are you ready for another bomb? What did I tell you about seraphims? They were the advisors. They were the closest to the throne of God. Seraphims. Seraphims in Hebrew means serpents. Did you know that? Seraph means serpent in Hebrew. Seraphim is a plural. So it's actually, and it's interesting, if you go to Babylon, if you go to Egypt, you have a lot of serpents that are represented by the right and the left of the kings. It's very, very interesting. But there was like really traditionally, the serpent was used as a metaphor for the advisor, the snake. It's not necessarily bad. The snake became bad once it fell, okay? But the snake is supposed to be an advisor. Seraphims, if you look at some descriptions, you'll see that they're reptiles, definitions, over some of the angels. Have you ever wondered why the angels, you know, they have like a lion's head and different heads? I believe that makes so much sense that Adam and Eve can talk to animals, because we're not really in animals in a world that is that has fallen. We're with animals that are actually representations of divine beings. Did I lose you? Did I lose you again? Okay. So now we are here with this Nakash or Seraph. And just look at the narrative now. You have a Nakash that comes to Eve and says, hey, why don't you eat the fruit? An advisor from God. And Eve's like, well, God says we shouldn't do it. Here's exactly how you're supposed to recognize when it's the devil and it's not God. If God says something and someone comes, even if he comes directly from the right side of the throne of God and tells you, did he really say that? That means that he's not coming with great purposes. He's coming with evil purposes. This is, I believe, the first time that the devil is acting in rebellion, full rebellion towards God, because he wants to take something from human beings. What do they have? What is the biggest power that Adam and Eve have in the Garden of Eden? They have the power of dominion and submission over the creation. Everything, the earth belongs to them. The only thing that they don't have is that they're not equal to God. And you have Satan, or a serpent, an advisor. I mean, you understand, I don't want to give, I don't want to say that Eve was then a good person and she was lured. I mean, she was lured, I believe. But she still decided to disobey God. And that's how sneaky the serpent is. That's why this word in Hebrew is both positive and negative. It's like what was once positive and clever and advised became sneaky and shrewd. So this is where we are. That Nakash and Seraph, he was not sent by God. That was the first divine being that was not sent by God. And later, as I said, Genesis 6, angels or divine beings, sons of God, will come to earth and take women as their wives. Not sent by God. That is what means the fall of an angel. They fall themselves. They just leave the presence of God themselves. So from then on, the serpent, and this is extremely important, okay? Listen to me. The serpent will be cast away from the presence of God. He will be sent to crawl on the earth. And see exactly that idea of that. Like, now you cannot be in my kingdom anymore. The Garden of Eden is heaven on earth. You cannot be in heaven on earth if you have evil in you. Therefore, Satan, you get out. Satan, serpent, Nakash, devil, you get out, and Adam and Eve, you get out as well. But when Adam and Eve are walking on earth, they are no longer with the dominion over earth. They no longer have authority over earth. It's been taken by the devil. It's been claimed by the devil in every ways. Look at this, Matthew chapter 4, verse 8. Matthew chapter 4, verse 8. And it's this moment where Jesus is going to be confronting the devil, Satan. He's called Satan with a big S, in the wilderness. And there's this moment, this very moment, chapter 4, verse 8. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And verse 9, all this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Satan, confronting Jesus, he has the guts to tell Jesus that he owns all of this. And what is almost terrifying in some ways that Jesus doesn't contradict him. Because Jesus knows that on the cross, he will claim all of those nations back to himself. The nations have been divided among the divine beings that disobeyed God. The one that was the first one disobeying and that took the dominion from Adam and Eve is now in charge of everything. All of those divine beings, we call them principalities, gods. Anything that is really powerful and demonic in an area, those are directly in talking with Satan and getting orders from him. This is how the heavenly realms work. It's a very, very quick definition, okay? But it's important to know. Don't be fascinated by demons and things like that, but know your enemy, guys. If we don't know how the devil works, we will not defeat him. If we don't know that the devil claims that he owns every soul and every square feet on the earth, we will not defeat him. This is exactly why this is important to find that narrative that is biblical, that is just understanding, oh, what if that was actually the way Satan fell? Does that make sense for you now? Is it starting to ring a bell? Like, oh, so the serpent was a member of the divine council who disobeyed God and was cast out of Eden. And like every man, since then, he's deprived from God's presence. I want to emphasize on that. You have, let's take Isaiah, the vision of the throne of Isaiah. I don't think it's a vision. I think it's a vision for him, but I think it was really taken before the throne of God. Okay? He's been taken before the throne of God, and he sees the glory of God in the holy temple, and there are angels singing, and there's incense burning, and there's coals burning, and all those things. And the thing that Isaiah does there is that he's like hiding himself because he knows that as a sinner he cannot be in the presence of God. There's something very clear. Heaven is not for evil or sin. There's no possibilities, no space for evil in heaven. Therefore, God comes through different ways to talk to men on earth. He comes with the presence of the Holy Spirit, of course. He comes through the angel of the Lord. Very often you meet the Lord, you're going to meet his angel. And that angel of the Lord is really like a metaphor for who Jesus is going to be later. Like Jesus is the presence of the Lord walking on earth. But Jesus can be in the presence of sinners because of his humanity. There's something kind of, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but he can be confronted to the sin, but no sin can enter him. He cannot be sinner. He cannot be sinful because he's fully God. And so at that point when he's confronting Satan, he can be in presence of Satan because he's man. Satan can come and stand before him because Jesus is a man. If you accept that this is not Satan in the book of Job, but it's a member of the divine council, if you accept that, then there's actually no mention in the Bible of a meeting between God and Satan after the serpent was cast away. None. Why? Because I believe it's impossible for Satan to stand in God's presence. Let's read that passage again. Just interesting. Imagine now that it's the accuser. I'm gonna say the accuser instead of Satan. Job 1, verse 6 through 12. Verse 6. One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser also came with them. The Lord said to the accuser, "Where have you come from?" The accuser answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to the accuser, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" The accuser replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now, stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to the accuser, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then the accuser went out from the presence of the Lord. I don't know if that makes sense to you right now, but this is just like changing everything. This changed everything to me years ago. How can you read Satan went out from the presence of the Lord when I myself, without the blood of Christ, I cannot be in his presence? If you just say that part, there is no account of Satan and God meeting again until Jesus, who is God, meets Satan in the desert. Satan and God will meet again when God will defeat him. There's no space in God's presence in heaven for the devil. So, we're not dealing with the devil. We're not. But it's a spiritual being, part of the divine council, that has a well-designated role. Accuse humans before God. If God can send a spirit for the spirit of lie, if God can send the spirit of death, if part of what God does sometimes requires not evil but suffering for the purpose of his plan, for what he wants to do, then the role of this accuser is to accuse. And it makes total sense here. His role is trying to convince God that the heart of some human beings is indeed wicked. And in this case, making the point that if everything were taken away from Job, he would start cursing the name of God. So now we know that. I'm going to watch a video like at school. Are you okay with that? Not like a long movie or anything. If you need to move because you can't see, I hope the sound will be good. But if you need to move, just move so you can watch this. This is the Bible Project. I've talked about them many, many times, so now I think these things will make sense.
There are 3 books in the Bible known as the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. The first, Proverbs, showed us that God is wise and just.
Yeah, we learned that God has ordered the world so that it's fair. The righteous are rewarded, the wicked are punished. In other words, you get what you deserve.
But then we meet Ecclesiastes, who observes, people don't always get what they deserve.
Yeah, he said the world isn't always fair, that life is unpredictable and hard to comprehend, just like smoke.
And this makes you wonder, okay, well, is God wise and just?
Exactly. And so it's that question that is being explored in the final book of wisdom, Job.
All right, let's dive in.
So Job begins with a strange story that takes place up in the heavens, which are described something like a heavenly command center. So God is there with these angelic creatures called the sons of God, and they're all there reporting for duty.
And God points out this guy Job, his servant, showing how righteous and good he is.
And then one of these angelic creatures approaches. He's referred to in Hebrew as the Satan.
The Satan. Who is this?
Well, this word is actually a title, which literally means the one who is opposed. So out of this whole crew, he is the one questioning how God is running the world. And he proposes that Job might not actually love God, that he's only a good person because God rewards him. If God were to take away all of the good things he gave to Job, then we would see his true colors.
So he thinks Job is just working the system?
That's exactly right. Maybe he's obeying just to get what he wants.
So God agrees to this experiment and allows the Satan to inflict suffering on Job.
And Job loses everyone and everything that he cares about. It is devastating. And remember, he deserves none of this. God himself said so.
The remarkable thing is that in the midst of all this suffering, Job still praises God.
At least for chapters 1 and 2. But then in chapter 3, we find out how he's really feeling inside. He unleashes this poem that reveals this devastation. It's a long, elaborate curse on the day that he was born.
After this, some of Job's friends come to visit him.
Well, that's it. I'll tell the rest of the story, I guess. That's the Wi-Fi that doesn't work well here. But you know what? I think I got pretty much most of what I wanted. So if you want to watch the full video, it will cost you $500. It's on YouTube, and turn off that TV so it's not going to bother us. What I wanted to give you, at least it's this beginning of this video, that's saying I'm not crazy. Okay? I didn't come up with that theory. I've read some books and I've changed my narrative. Why did it change my narrative? Because it starts to really give us a lot more explanations about the idea of God not allowing evil. I want you to understand something. I think God can allow suffering if it comes out of his judging hand. And sometimes he does, even with us today. There's still judgment. You know, I think Ananias and Sapphira, this story of this couple that was lying to God in the book of Acts. So we're after Jesus, we're after the Pentecost, we're actually in the gospel times that we are in right now, and still God will strike them with death because they're lying. Judgment can happen. But you have to ask yourself a question. Job's story is not to explain to you how God works with the devil. It does not. It's not theology about evil. It's telling you how you're supposed to give up everything to the will of God, even when you don't understand. If you really read the book of Job for what it's talking about, it's just about that idea. You don't have all of the informations. You don't have to make plans or anything. Actually, when you're a Christian that says, like this man with the shoulder that says, I believe God gave me this for a reason, you are making your own narrative. That's exactly what the book of Job is about. No, don't do it. It's very easy to actually say, if you're suffering, there must be something wrong with you, like Job's friends. And that's why you see that's the biggest part of the book you think is that, but the reality is it's the same thing the other way. I am a sinner, therefore I deserve what I have, that I have suffering and everything. That's not true. That's not how God works. So if there is suffering, and it is not judgment upon you, the reality is in 99.9% of cases, unless you're Job and God wants to make a point, 99.9% of cases it comes whether from you directly or the devil. I want to give you those three points, okay? God doesn't allow evil, but he can cause suffering for judgment. We established that. God doesn't allow evil, but the devil causes suffering for the purpose of evil. Okay, that's the second one. The third one, God doesn't allow evil, but we can harm ourselves. You don't have to see the devil between every suffering. But who breaks the power of suffering? Who died on the cross? And his wounds, he was striped so we can be healed by his wounds. Jesus. You don't have to spend too much time about thinking about evil. Think about heaven. Think about how much the Father is good. Allowing evil, allowing, sometimes it's a word, it's a choice of word, but allowing evil would mean that there's a conversation. You have to have a conversation. I allow you. There's no conversation between God and the devil. There's none. If you can leave this place with a peace in your heart that this is actually a misrepresentation of how it happens in the heavenly realm, there's no conversation between God and the devil. They're not talking about your soul. They're not talking about how they can experiment. It is not because it happened in the book of Job, and I believe we established not with Satan, that it will happen with you. I don't understand why there is suffering. I don't understand sometimes why God doesn't heal people. Well, I don't know if it's not Him healing or if it's us not getting the correct key in prayer. I don't know if you've ever prayed for a long time and realized that at some point you did that specific prayer and there was results. I've done that many times. It's very hard to know. I don't know if God allows people to die or if it's the devil that is taking souls and souls, you know what I mean, taking their bodies, like just striking. Sometimes if it's judgment, we said, yeah, he can allow it. Sometimes it's like God is weeping over it. Remember Jesus, when there's his friend Lazarus, he weeps. He's mourning the death of his friend, and then he brings him back to life. You've got to understand that God is good. God is fundamentally love and doesn't want evil. God is good like you will never be until you enter His presence. Like you will never be. A couple weeks ago I told you that the church is meant to be a family that you will never have. It's so great as a family that you'll never be able to raise your children and have them love each other and have them love you and love your parents as good as what the church is supposed to be as a family. The same thing comes from the heart of God. He's so much love that He doesn't allow evil. But here it is. He uses evil. God uses evil. God turns something into something that is wicked into something that is beautiful. If you look at the whole New Testament, and you look just at the genealogy of Christ, you will see that there is a prostitute, or there is a woman that was luring her father-in-law into sleeping with her. There's like brokenness for all of the things. And that brought Jesus. It's hard to understand why there is evil. Whether God allows it or not, I think He doesn't, okay? But the reality is like it's very easy to understand that God uses evil and glorifies Himself through evil. So when there is suffering, when there is evil, and when you recognize that in your life, I want to challenge you guys to say, God, glorify your name. The Lord has taken, the Lord has given, and the Lord has taken. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Let's stand together.
Amen.